The river took the cull row a little before dawn, and the pack of Vintreach stood on the high bank and let it. I remember the sound first. Not the water I had heard my whole life, the Aldebec running black and cold under the hold, swollen every spring and every spring pulling back into its banks like a beast that had thought better of it. No. What I remember is the sound the culls made when the flood reached their pens. High and thin and terrible, the cry of creatures who cannot climb and cannot swim and cannot understand, only wait in the dark for the men who put them there to come back. No men came back. Culls are culls. That was the law of Vintreach, older than my crown, older than my grandsire's crown. The maimed wolf, the three-legged, the blind, the runt too small to hunt, was penned at the low end of the hold below the burying ground, and when the moon turned it was culled, quick and clean, and no one wept over it, because to weep over a cull was to shame the strong. I was Alpha King of the Skull. I had 100 hearths and 400 wolves and a hall with a fire that never died, and I stood on that bank in the gray before dawn with my huntmaster at my shoulder, and I listened to the culls scream, and I felt nothing but the cold. That is the truth, and I will not soften it. I was a hard man. I had made myself hard the way you temper iron, on purpose, in fire, because a soft king is a dead king, and I had buried too many I loved to be anything but iron. They'll drown before the water's up, Oscar said beside me, my huntmaster, a big gray-bearded wolf of a man and no cruelty in him, only the law. No sense a good man breaking his neck on those rocks for a cull pen. Let the river do the mooncull early this year. He almost smiled. Saves us the walk. I did not answer. I was watching the water. Because someone was in it. At first I took it for a beam, a piece of the broken pen turning in the current, a dark shape low on the black water, moving wrong, moving against the flood where everything else moved with it. Then the shape lifted an arm and I understood it was a woman, chest deep and climbing deeper, wading out toward the drowning pens with her skirts dragging like a dead weight around her legs, and she had a rope over one shoulder, and she was singing. I could not hear the words. The river ate them. But I could see her mouth moving steady, the way you sing to a frightened animal, and I saw the culls turn their ruined faces toward her the way flowers turn to a low sun, and I saw her reach the first pen and go under and come up with a wolf across her arms. A small one. A runt. A nothing. A wolf we would have killed at the next moon without a second thought, and set it up on the broken planking above the water, and go back under for the next. "Who was that?" I said. My voice did not sound like mine. Oscar spat into the flood. "The Bone Girl," he said, and there was something in how he said it, something that curdled not hate, worse than hate, the easy contempt a man keeps for a thing he has stopped seeing. "The scavenger, lives down in the cull shed, gods know why we let her, picks the midden, smells of carrion." He shook his head. "Let her drown with them if she's fool enough, one less mouth. I have hunted men across 3 winters. I have stood in the shield line and held it when the line to either side of me broke. I have carried my own brother's body up a mountain in the snow. I am telling you this so you understand that I do not frighten. And I am telling you that when I saw that woman go under the 3rd time and not come up as quick as she should, something opened in my chest that I had kept shut for 20 years, and I was over the bank before I had decided to move. "Alpha," Oscar's hand caught my arm. I threw it off. The water hit me like a wall of knives. I am a big man and it lifted me anyway, spun me, filled my mouth with silt and cold, and I fought it the way you fight a stronger wolf, not against its whole strength but across it, angling, letting it carry me where I already meant to go, toward her, toward the pens, toward the small ruined shapes crying on the broken wood. I reached the planking and hauled myself half onto it, and got my first real look at her. She was younger than the pack's scorn had painted her, hard to say how young, with her hair plastered black to her skull, and her lips gone blue, and the river streaming off her, and she was not looking at me at all. She had gone under after a wolf pinned by a fallen beam, a big old gray one missing a foreleg, 3-legged, worthless, exactly the kind of animal the law of Vintrich existed to erase, and she had her shoulder under the beam and her whole small body shaking with the strain of lifting it, and she was still singing in gasps now, half drowned, and she would not let go. "Leave it," I shouted. "Woman, leave it, it's a cull." She looked at me then, one look. Rain and river running off a face that should have been afraid and was only furious, and she said, "I will remember it the rest of my life," she said. "Then help me lift it, or get off my planking." I lifted the beam. Gods forgive me, I do not know why. It was the coldest, stupidest thing I had ever done, to put my king's back under a fallen beam to free a three-legged wolf, while the river tried to kill us both. But her fury was a rope and it had hold of me, and I got my hands under the wet wood and heaved, and the beam came up, and she dragged the gray wolf out from under it by the scruff, and it snapped at her once from pure terror, and she said, "Hush, Ashfoot, hush, I have you," and it went limp in her arms and let her carry it, three-legged and shivering, up onto the wood beside the others. And then the planking broke. I felt it go, that sick lurch of the world dropping out from under you, and I heard her cry out, and I saw the wolves scatter up the last dry boards, and then the river had me. It closed over my head, black and total, and turned me end over end, and my crown of a skull cracked against something under the water, and the cold went in through the crack and the dark came down. I want you to understand what happened next, because I did not understand it for a long time, and when I finally did, it broke something in me and remade it. I was drowning, a king of the skull, dying in a spring flood over a cull pen, and no one on that high bank was coming for me. Oscar could not have found me in that water, and the pack does not go into the Aldebec in spring, not for a cull, and not, in that first terrible moment, for me, because they did not yet know their king was in the river at all. I had gone in too fast and too far. I was alone in the black, and my strength was going, and the last thing my body did before it gave up was to stop fighting. And then hands found me. Small hands. Hard hands, scarred, strong out of all proportion to their size, and they closed in my collar and in my hair, and they hauled, and I felt the woman's whole weight thrown backward against the pull of the river, using the current the way I had, across it, and I felt the rope she had over her shoulder go taut around us both, and somewhere far above I understood she had tied the other end to something on the bank before she ever went in, because of course she had. Because she was the only soul in Vintrich who had come to that river, prepared to save a life, instead of watch one end. She dragged me up the mud on my back. I remember the sky gray going white. I remember her face over mine, and her hands flat on my chest, pressing again, until the river came up out of me in a black rush, and I rolled and heaved and breathed, that first breath, that tearing, holy first breath, and lay there in the mud shaking like the three-legged wolf she'd saved. She did not know me. That is the thing, that is the whole of it. She knelt over a half-drowned stranger caked in silt, a big man in ruined clothes with a broken head, and she did not see the alpha king of the skull. She saw a life. She put her cloak, soaked, useless hers, over me anyway, and she pushed the wet hair off my brow with a hand that shook from cold, and she said low, the way she'd sung to the wolf, "There now, there, you're not for the river today. Breathe for me." And behind her, up on the high bank, I heard my pack begin to shout, because they had finally seen their king lying in the mud, and Oscar was crashing down the slope white-faced, and the whole world was about to come pouring down on the two of us. And Brenna, the bone girl, the scavenger, who had just pulled her king out of death and did not know it, only turned from me to gather a shivering three-legged wolf against her chest, and I lay in the mud and looked up at her. And for as long as I had been king, a fist had been closed somewhere under my ribs, and it came open. My wolf, who had bared his teeth at every living soul for 20 years, who trusted nothing and no one, and least of all himself, lay down in the dark of me and put his head upon his paws. For he said, "Sir, hurry." They carried me up to the hall on a litter of spears and cloaks, and by the time the fire had me and the healer had my head bound, Half of Vintreach had crowded into the great hall to see whether their king would live, and the story was already running wild among them. It was not, I learned, the story of the woman. It was the story of me, of how the Alpha King had gone into the flood, how brave, how mighty, how the river had dared to take him and been made to give him back. Men who had stood on that bank and done nothing now spoke of the current as though they'd wrestled it. Oscar knelt by my bed with his big hands twisting and begged my pardon for laying a hand on my arm to stop me, and swore he'd never doubt my judgment again, and I let him, because I was still half in the river and could not yet find the words. And nowhere in the telling was there a woman with a rope over her shoulder and a wolf in her arms. "The bone girl," I said. My voice came out a rasp. The hall went quiet. A king's first word after near death is a heavy thing. "Where is the bone girl?" Oscar blinked. The scavenger, Alpha, gone back to the cull shed, I'd think. She got herself out of the water. No one drowned but very nearly you. She pulled me out. The silence changed. I felt it change. 100 wolves rearranging what they thought they knew. "Alpha," Oscar said carefully, "the way you speak to a man with a cracked skull, you were half drowned. The head plays tricks." "She tied a rope to the bank," I said, "before she went in. She went into that river with a line because she meant to bring things out of it, which is more than any wolf of mine can say." I got up on one elbow, and the healer made a noise of protest, and I ignored her. "I put my back under a beam to free a 3-legged wolf because a woman told me to help her or get off her planking, and then the wood broke and I went under and she came in after me. Not one of you. Her." No one spoke. "You told me," I said to Oscar, and I kept my voice very level, which is how those who know me can tell I am furious, "to let her drown with them. One less mouth." Oscar's face went the color of ash. I lay back. My head was splitting, but under the pain, that open place in my chest was singing so loud I could barely think past it, and I did not yet understand it, only that it had her name in it, and I did not even know her name. "Bring her to me," I said. "She won't come," said a voice from the back of the hall. An old woman, one of the hearth keepers, bent and gray, who tended the fires and was mostly invisible the way the very old become. She came forward a few steps, wringing her apron, braver than my whole pack. "Begging your pardon, Alpha, she won't come to the hall. She's not let in the hall, hasn't been since she was small." The old woman's chin lifted a little. "You'll have to go to her, if you want her. Down the cull row." "Why won't she be let in the hall?" The old woman looked at Oscar, and at the pack, and something moved behind her eyes, years of it. A long, slow anger banked like a fire under ash, and she said, "Because we decided a long time ago what she was, Alpha, and it was easier to keep on believing it than to go down there and look." I went down the cull row the next dawn, against the healer's every wish, with my head still bound and a stick to lean on and no guard at all. I would not take Oscar. I would not take any of them. This I would see with my own eyes and no one else's telling laid over it. The cull row was the low end of Vintreach below the burying ground, where the land went soft and reedy toward the river. I had not walked it in years. A king does not go where the culls are kept. That is beneath him. That is the whole design of it. So I did not know, none of us knew. That is the shame of it. None of us had gone to look. What the bone girl had made of the place we had given her to rot in. I smelled it before I saw it, and Oscar had told me true about one thing. It did not smell of the hall. It smelled of clean straw and tallow smoke and pine tar salve, and the warm animal musk of many wolves closed together, and under it, faint, the green smell of herbs drying. It smelled of a place where things were kept alive. And then I came around the reed bank and I saw the cull row, and I stopped, and I leaned on my stick, and I am not ashamed to say that the king of the skull stood in the mud and could not speak. There were wolves everywhere. Not the sad, penned, waiting for death wolves of the law. These wolves were alive in the way that living things are when someone loves them. A 3-legged gray, Ashfoot, the one from the flood, dry now and lordly, lay in a patch of thin sun on a bed of clean straw with his ruined shoulder toward the warmth. A blind pup, no bigger than my 2 fists, tumbled at the feet of an old bitch missing an ear who nosed it back from the water's edge with the weary patience of 100 mothers. A young wolf with a badly set foreleg that had healed crooked but healed limped over to sniff my stick and decided I was not interesting and limped away. There were runts grown sleek. There was a great scarred male, half his face a mask of old burn, who lifted his head and watched me with the one eye he had and did not growl, because nothing in this place had learned to fear a man. There were a dozen of them, 15, more, every one of them a wolf that the law of Vintrich said should be dead, every one of them a wolf that I or my father or the moon cull would have erased without a thought. And they were here, and they were whole in the only way that mattered, and they had made a strange soft pack of the broken and the discarded, down in the mud below the burying ground, where no king ever came to look. And in the middle of them, on her knees in the straw, with the blind pup now bundled into the crook of her arm, and a pot of salve balanced on one knee, was the woman from the river. She had not heard me. She was working salve into Ashfoot's ruined shoulder, gentle, absorbed, murmuring to him, and the great 3-legged wolf that had snapped from terror in the flood lay under her hands as trusting as a hearth dog. Her own hands, I saw now in the daylight, were a map of her life scarred across the knuckles, one finger crooked from an old break set by no one, chapped raw from cold water, a burn mark old and shining up one wrist. The hands of a woman who had done hard, unlovely, saving work for a long time with no one to see it, and no one to thank her. I must have made a sound. The stick perhaps in the mud. She turned and she saw me, and her whole body changed. Not with fear. I want that clear. She did not cower. Whatever else they had beaten out of her, they had not managed that. But her face closed like a door, and she set the pup down and rose and put herself between me and the wolves without seeming to decide to, and she said, flat, wary, a woman who had learned exactly what it meant when one of the hall folk came down the cull row. If you've come to count them for the moon cull, you can turn around. They're mine. I feed them off my own portion. They cost the hold nothing. Then she saw the binding on my head, and I watched her recognize me not as the king, as the man from the river. Her eyes went to the bruise at my temple and the way I leaned on the stick, and something flickered, quick and unguarded, before the door closed again. You, she said, the one from the flood, a pause, you lived. I lived, I said, because you came in after me. She shrugged one shoulder, a small hard motion. The wolves were more trouble, you at least I could get a hand on. She looked me over, taking in the good if ruined cloak, the bearing, the deference of my own careful walk into a place I did not belong. And I saw the moment she understood what I was, and I braced for it, for the fear, or worse, the sudden fawning, the way the pack's contempt would curdle into terror now that the scavenger knew whose life she'd handled so plainly in the mud. It did not come. She only went very still, and then she said, quietly, with a dignity that took the breath out of me, Alpha King. And she inclined her head, not a grovel, a courtesy, the courtesy of an equal who has decided to grant it. And then she said the thing that undid the last of the iron in me. If I'd known who you were, she said, I'd have pulled you out the same, but I'd have been ruder about the beam. And the corner of her mouth moved just barely, and there, under the wariness and the scars and the years of being made into a thing, was a spark of pure, unbroken humor. And my wolf, lying in the dark of me with his head on his paws, thumped his tail once against my ribs. I laughed. It hurt my head, and I did not care. It was the first true laugh I had laughed in longer than I could name. Alpha, she said, watching me with new caution now that I'd laughed, because a laughing king was outside her experience of kings. Why are you here? To thank you, I said. You've thanked me, you can go. She turned back to Ashfoot, dismissing me, the king of the skull, dismissed like a draft from an open door, and it was so absurd and so clean and so entirely without calculation that I understood in that moment I was not going anywhere. Not up the row, Not for a long time. "What's your name?" I said. She did not turn around. "They call me the Bone Girl." "That is what they call you. I asked your name." Her hands went still on the wolf's shoulder. It was a small thing, and it told me everything. That no one had asked in a long time, that the name had been buried under the other one so long she'd half forgotten she had a right to it. "Brenna," she said to the wolf, not to me. "My name is Brenna." "Brenna," I said, and I felt the shape of it, and my wolf sighed as though he'd been holding his breath for 20 years. "I am Torin, and I am not leaving until you tell me how a woman the whole hold calls a scavenger came to be keeping 15 wolves alive that the law of my own house says should be dead." She turned then, and she looked at me for a long moment, weighing me the way she'd weighed the flood, deciding whether I was a current she could cross. "You'll want to sit then," she said at last. "It's a long telling. And you look like a man who ought to be lying down." She had been a cull herself. That is how she told it plain, without asking for pity, working salve into a wolf's shoulder while she spoke so she would not have to watch my face. She had been born small, a runt, a scrap, sickly, and her mother had died of the birthing of her, and her father soon after of a winter fever, and an orphaned runt in Vintreach is a mouth, and a mouth that cannot pull its weight is a cull near enough. They had not culled her. Even Vintreach did not put children to the Moonblade, but they had done the next thing, which was to give her to the cull row to tend. A child of 6 set to feed the dying wolves until they were killed, because it was work no one wanted and she was worth no more than the work. They thought it'd be quick, she said. A small girl among culls. Either the wolves would settle it or the cold, or I'd wander off. Nobody meant it as a life. It was a way to be rid of me without the shame of it. She rubbed her thumb along Ashfoot's ear. But the wolves didn't settle it. The first one I fed was blind and old and dazed from the blade, and he put his head in my lap because I was the only warm thing that had ever come to him without a knife. And I thought, her voice caught, the only time it caught in the whole telling. I thought, we're the same, you and I, we're both what they throw away, and I decided I would not throw you away, and then there was another, and another. She had been keeping them alive for 19 years. Quietly, under the law, around the law, off her own thin portion, salving and setting and warming and feeding the wolves the pack condemned. And every mooncull, when Oscar and his men came down the road to do the killing, she would have hidden the one strong enough to hide, and pled for the one she couldn't, and taken the blows they gave her for the pleading, and buried the one she lost, and gone on. 19 years. A child grown to a woman in the mud below the burying ground, hated by a hold that had never once come to see what she was doing, called a scavenger because she took the discarded, called carrion girl because she smelled of the salve and the straw and the honest work of keeping death back with 2 scarred hands. "They think I pick the midden for scraps to feed myself," she said. "I pick it for the wolves, bones for the ones with bad teeth, rags for bedding, fat for the salve," she shrugged. "Let them think what they like, it's kept them from looking closer. If they knew how many I had down here, they'd have culled the lot years ago to teach me my place." She finally looked up at me, and there was a challenge in it, a bracing, because she had just handed her whole secret to the one man in the world with the power to end it. "So now you know, Alpha. 15 culls the law says are dead. What will you do about it?" And I looked at that woman, soaked cloak still drying on a peg, hands scarred from 19 years of unthanked mercy, 15 ruined wolves living because she had refused to let them die. The whole warm, impossible, unlawful heart of my kingdom beating in secret in the one place I had been too proud to go, and I understood that I had been a king of the wrong things. I had made myself iron. I had thought that was strength. I had stood on a high bank in the gray dawn and felt nothing while the helpless screamed, and called it the discipline of a king. And a scavenger with a rope over her shoulder had gone into the black water, and shown me that I had confused hardness with worth my whole life, and that the strongest soul in Vintreach was the one we had thrown to the mud. "What will I do about it?" I said. My voice was rough. "I am going to sit here if you'll let me, and I am going to learn the name of every wolf you've saved. And then I am going to go back up to my hall and think very hard about the kind of king I have been." Brenna stared at me. Then slowly she picked up the blind pup and put it into my hands, the king of the skull, given a blind runt to hold, the smallest and most worthless creature in the whole hold, and she said, watching me, testing me, "That one's Moat. She can't see, so she needs to hear your heart to know you're safe. Hold her against your chest." I held the pup against my chest. It burrowed in and went still and slept, and I felt the tiny weight of it and the tiny drum of its heart against mine, and the fist that had come open in me the day before opened wider, until I thought I might come apart entirely, there in the straw, in the mud, below the burying ground, in the one warm corner of my cold kingdom. "Torin," Brenna said, and it was the first time she'd used my name, and it went through me like the first breath after the river. "You're crying, Alpha." "I am," I said. She didn't mock me for it. She just handed me a rag, the same rough rag she used for the salve. It was all she had, and turned back to her wolves so I could do it without a witness, which was, I would learn the whole of her. A fierce, quiet mercy that always looked away at the right moment so the thing she was saving would not have to feel small. I stayed until dark. I learned all their names. Ashfoot and Moat, and the one-eared bitch called Nan, and the burnt male called Ember, and the crook-legged young one called Tuck, and all the rest. Every one, and Brenna's face changed by degrees as she watched me learn them. The wariness thawing into something she clearly had not felt in 19 years and did not have a name for, and my wolf lay in the sun of her and would not have moved for the whole world. I did not tell her that night what she was to me, that the bond had woken in the river and named her mine. I did not tell her because she had been claimed and used and made into things her whole life by people stronger than her, and I would not be one more powerful creature deciding what she was without asking. She had spent 19 years being told what she was worth. When I gave her her worth, it would not be another cage. It would be a door, and she would walk through it herself, or not at all. So I only said, at the gate of the cull row in the dark, leaning on my stick, "May I come back tomorrow?" And Brenna, the bone girl, the scavenger, the strongest soul in Vintreach, looked at the king of the skull asking permission to enter the place they'd thrown her, and something in her face broke open and mended all at once, and she said, "Bring your own rag next time, Alpha. I've only the one." I went back the next day, and the next, and the one after. I told the hall I was walking to build my strength after the flood, and let them think what they liked. And I walked every day down past the burying ground to the cull row, and I learned to salve a wolf's shoulder, and to warm a chilled pup inside my own coat, and to sing badly. She said, "Gods, so badly," the low, steady nothing song that told a frightened animal it was safe. I learned Brenna the way you learn a language, slowly, and then all at once. I learned that she was funny, dry as winter, a humor so quiet you could miss it, aimed most often at herself and never once at the helpless. I learned she was proud, in the true way, not the way that needs others below it, but the way that will not bend to be made small. I learned she had taught herself to read from a fever log a dead healer had left in the shed, and that she knew more of wounds and salves and the setting of bones than the healer up in my hall, and had never once been asked. I learned that she woke every night to the wolves and slept in snatches and had not had a full night's rest in 19 years, and that she did not think this remarkable. And I learned that she was afraid of exactly one thing, and it was not the flood or the pack or the mooncull. It was hope. She had made herself as careful of hope as I had made myself of softness, for the same reason, because it had been used against her, over and over, and she had learned that the safest thing was to want nothing you could be made to lose. So when she began slowly to look for me at the gate each morning, when I caught her once, before she smoothed it away, watching the path for me with something bare and young in her face, I understood what it cost her, and I moved gently, the way you move around a wolf that has been struck by hands before. The bond in me roared to close the distance. My wolf wanted to claim her, to carry her up to the hall, to put her at my side before the whole pack and dare them to say one word. That is the old blood, the alpha blood. It does not ask, it takes. And I held it. Every day I held it. Because I had learned in the mud below the burying ground that the truest strength I had was not the strength to take. It was the strength to wait until she was ready to give. It was Oscar who forced the thing before its time. I should have seen it coming. The pack had noticed their king walking daily to the cull row. The story of the flood had turned in the telling. Some of the shame of that dawn had begun, quietly, to settle where it belonged, and men do not love the woman whose courage shows up their cowardice. And the mooncull was coming. I came down the row one gray morning and found Oscar there ahead of me, with 6 of his hunters and their blades, and Brenna standing in the gate of her own shed with her arms flung wide across it and her chin up and Ashfoot snarling at her heel. And the old contempt was gone from Oscar's face, and something uglier had replaced it. The anger of a man who has been made to feel small and means to make someone smaller. "Mooncull's 3 days off," Oscar was saying, "but the alpha's soft on you, everyone can see it, so we'll do it now quiet before he can be made a fool of. 15 culls harbored against the law 19 years. You've shamed this whole hold, scavenger. Step aside." "You'll not touch them," Brenna said. "I'll touch what the law says." "You'll not touch them." And her voice cracked like the flood ice, and for the first time I saw the fury she'd shown me in the river turned full on a man, and it was a terrible thing, and a magnificent one. "I have fed these wolves off my own hunger for 19 years while you and yours ate at the hall and never once came to see. You call them culls. I know their names. Ember was burned pulling a whelp from a grass fire before you ever cast him down. Nan raised 11 litters of your hunter's pups before her ear went, and you decided she was done. You want to kill them to punish me for being braver than you in the river. And you'll have to go through me, Oscar, and I have been going through worse than you my whole life." Oscar's hand went to his blade. And I stepped out of the reeds and said, in the voice I use perhaps once in a rain, the voice that stops a shield line breaking, "Sheathe it." Everything stopped. Oscar spun. His hunters went to their knees on instinct, because that voice does that to Skull wolves. It is bred into us. Oscar did not kneel, not at once. He was too far into his anger, and I walked out of the reeds and down into the cull row, past the kneeling hunters, past the snarling 3-legged wolf, and I stood between Brenna and the blades with my back to her, facing my own huntmaster, and I let him see my face. "Alpha," Oscar said, "the law." "The law," I said, "is mine. I am the law of Vintrich. My father was and his father, and now I am, and I am telling you that the law changes today in this hour on this ground." I heard Brenna go still behind me. "There will be no mooncull, not this moon, not any moon. The cull row is ended. It ends now because I end it, because I am the king. And because a scavenger pulled me out of the river you all left me to drown in, and I have finally understood what my kingdom throws away." "You'd shame your own line," Oscar said low, "for the bone girl and her sick wolves." "I do not often let my wolf into my voice. I let him now." "That bone girl," I said, and the reeds themselves seemed to shrink from it, "has more honor in her scarred hands than this whole hall has in its 400 throats. She went into the Aldebec with a rope when not one of you would wet your boots. She has kept 15 lives burning for 19 years off nothing but her own hunger, and would have taken your blades in her body before she let you have them. You called her a scavenger because it was easier than looking at what she was doing down here in the dark while you feasted. And I stood on that bank with you, Oscar, and I felt nothing, and called it strength. And she has taught me it was only cowardice with a crown on." The cull row was silent, but for the water and the wolves. "Kneel," I said, "to your king. And when you rise you will go up to the hall and you will tell every wolf in Vintrich that the alpha commands the whole pack down to the cull row at dusk, every soul. They are going to come and look at last at what we have been throwing away. Now kneel." Oscar knelt. And behind me, so quiet only I could hear it, Brenna made a small broken sound, the sound of a woman who has braced against a blow her whole life and had it turn, at the last instant, into a hand held out, and I turned. And she was staring at me, and there were tears standing in her fierce, dry eyes, and she was furious about them. And I wanted more than I have ever wanted anything to take her face in my hands, and I did not, because it was still not the moment. Because there was one more thing she had to be given first, in front of them all, so that no wolf of Vintreach could ever again pretend not to know what she was. "Come to the hall at dusk," I told her. "Please bring them all, bring every wolf you've saved." "Torin," she started. "Please," I said, "trust me one more time. You've trusted me with your rag and your wolves and your name. Trust me with this." And she looked at me for a long moment, hope and terror at war in her. And then the strongest soul in Vintreach said, so softly, "All right, Torin, one more time." They came at dusk, all of them. 400 wolves of the Skald crowded into the great hall and spilling out the doors, drawn by their king's command and by rumor and by the strange thing that had come over Vintreach since the flood, a loosening, a shame beginning to turn. And I made them wait. I sat my high seat and I said nothing, and I let the silence build, until every wolf in that hall was leaning forward, until Oscar at the foot of the dais had gone gray with waiting, and only then did I rise, and only then did the doors at the far end open, and Brenna came in. She came in with 15 wolves. I had asked her to, and she had the 3-legged and the blind and the 1-eared and the burnt, the crook-legged and the runts grown sleek, the whole strange soft pack of the discarded, and she walked up the length of that hall through 400 staring wolves with Moat the blind pup in the crook of her arm and Ashfoot limping lordly at her heel. And she had washed, and put on the one good garment she owned, a plain dark dress worn thin but clean, and she held her head as high as any queen who ever lived. And the hall went utterly, absolutely silent, because they were looking at last, really looking, at the wolves they had condemned, alive and whole and following a scavenger like she was the moon herself, at the burn-scarred male who had saved a whelp from fire, at the old bitch who had raised their own hunter's pups, at 15 lives they had ordered killed, walking their hall, warm and living, because one woman they had thrown in the mud had refused for 19 years to let them die. And they were looking at her, and I watched from my high seat as 400 wolves of the Skald saw Brenna for the first time, not the bone girl, not the scavenger, not the carrion thing they'd made her, but the woman who was braver than the lot of them and had been, all along, right there, below the burying ground, where none of them had troubled to look. I came down from the dais. I came down the whole length of the hall to meet her, and the pack drew back to make a lane, and I stopped before her, king of the Skald before the scavenger, and I went down on one knee in front of my whole assembled pack. The hall made a sound like a held breath released. An alpha king does not kneel, not to anyone. It is not done. It may never have been done in the whole history of the Skald. And I knelt in the rushes before Brenna and her 15 wolves, and I took her scarred hand, the crooked finger, the burn-shining wrist, the hand that had pulled me out of death and never known whose life it held, and I pressed my brow to it, the way you honor the thing you hold most sacred, and I said loud, so that not one wolf in that hall could pretend afterward not to have heard. You pulled me out of the Aldebec, and you did not know I was your king, and you'd have done it the same. You've kept 15 lives burning for 19 years off your own hunger and asked no one for thanks. This whole hold called you the least of us, and you are the best of us, and I have been a fool and a coward and a hard, cold king, and you waded into black water and taught me what a life is worth. My voice was not steady. I did not try to make it steady. I have no mate. I have never wanted one. And then a scavenger told me to help her lift a beam or get off her planking, and my wolf lay down for the first time in 20 years, and I knew. You are my fated mate, Brenna. The bond woke in the river. It has your name in it. It has had your name in it since your hands first closed over my heart. I lifted my head and looked up at her, kneeling, the whole pack witness. I will not take it, I said. You have been taken from and used and made into things your whole life, and I will not be one more strong creature deciding what you are. So I am asking, on my knees before them all so they can never unsee it, be my mate, be Luna of the skull. Not because I command it, I command nothing of you, ever, but because I have loved you since the mud below the burying ground, and I would spend the rest of my reign learning to be worthy of the hand that saved me. Brenna stood very still, with the blind pup in her arm and her scarred hand in mine and 400 wolves and her whole ruined saved pack watching, and I saw her 19 years of careful, armored hopelessness rise up one last time, and I saw her look down at me, kneeling, the king of the skull, and I saw her decide at last to want something she could be made to lose. You truly don't know, she said, and her voice shook. The first thing about being asked, do you, Alpha? You've done it terribly. And there, through the tears, through the whole impossible weight of the moment, came that dry, quiet spark of hers, that unbroken thing they had never managed to put out. 19 years I waited for one soul in this hold to come down and look, and I get a king who kneels in the rushes and confesses he's a coward in front of everyone. You could have just brought the rag. Brenna, I said, is that a yes? She sank down. Right there in the rushes in front of the whole pack, she knelt too, so that we were level, king and scavenger, eye to eye, and she put her free hand against my chest the way she had in the mud when she forced the river out of me and gave me back my life over my heart. And she said, lo, for me, and for the whole hall, and for the 15 wolves, and for the 19 years. Yes, you great fool of a king. Yes. And the bond that had woken in the black water closed all at once, the way the river had closed over my head, but warm, a flood of warmth up from where her hand lay over my heart, filling every cold iron corner of me, and my wolf who had lain down in the dark 20 years ago, rose at last, not to claim, not to take, but simply to stand beside her, where he would stand for the rest of my days. The hall erupted, 400 wolves of the skull, and I could not tell you now whether they cheered from love or shame or wonder or all three at once, and it did not matter because I was not listening. I had gathered Brenna against me, the blind pup squashed warm between us, and Ashfoot leaning his three-legged weight against us both, and I had my brow against her hair, and she smelled. Oscar had told me true that first gray dawn, and he had never known how wrong he was to sneer at it. She smelled of clean straw and tallow and salve and honest saving work. She smelled of mercy, and I breathed it in and knew I was home. There is no cull row in Vintrich now. I had the low pens torn down the same spring, board by board, and the burn piles cold. There is no mooncull. There has not been, since the night my Luna walked her 15 wolves up the length of my hall and I knelt in the rushes and learned to ask. Where the pen stood there is a long warm hall now, straw-bedded and tallow-lit, and the pack has a name for it that is not cull. They call it Brenna's hall, and they bring her the ones they would once have carried to the blade, the three-legged whelp, the runt, the old wolf whose teeth have gone, and they lay them at her scarred hands and ask, humbly, whether she can keep them, and she nearly always can. Oscar keeps the fires there now. He asked for the work himself, the winter after, and would not meet my eye when he asked, and I gave it to him without a word, because a man may be more than the worst dawn of his life if he is given the chance to prove it, and my Luna taught me that too, in the mud, before I ever knew her name. The pack that called her scavenger calls her Luna now, and means it and bows to her, and some of them weep when they do, the old ones, the ones who stood on the high bank that gray morning and did nothing, because they know now what they nearly drowned, and they carry it, and I do not take it from them because it has made them gentler wolves. But I will tell you the truth of my own heart, and then I am done. I am king of the skull. I have a hall with a fire that never dies and 400 wolves, and a mate who is worth every one of them and more. And every dawn I wake before her, the way I have since the flood, and I lie still in the gray light with the weight of a three-legged wolf against my back and the small blind warmth of moat curled at our feet, and I watch Brenna sleep, my Luna, who for 19 years never slept a whole night through, and who sleeps now deep and easy, because at last there is someone to keep the dark back so she does not have to keep it back alone. And I think every dawn of black water closing over my head, and of small scarred hands finding me in it and refusing to let go. She counted my life once. That woman, when she did not know it was a king's, counted it worth going into a killing flood after, the same as any three-legged wolf, the same as any runt, the same as any discarded thing the world had decided was worth nothing. I know exactly what my life is worth now. It is worth exactly what hers is, and what Ashfoot's is, and Moat's, and Ember's, and every soul we ever threw to the mud below the burying ground and called a cull. She taught me that with her 2 hands in the river before she knew my name. And every dawn I wake and she is breathing soft beside me, and I am the richest king who ever lived.